Hello and welcome to our third interview with an election professional and researcher into the Polish elections. We're here to find out much more about what happened about a week ago in the Polish elections. Would you mind telling us a little bit about what you've been doing and about the research you've conducted?
My name is Przemysław Furgacz. I was born in Bytom in Poland. I was born in 1982. Nowadays, I am a dean at the Faculty of Social and Technical Sciences in the University of Business and Entrepreneurship in Ostrowiec Świętokrzyski. It is a private university. Ostrowiec Świętokrzyski is a small town situated exactly halfway between Warsaw and Krakow. Yes, I'm an observer of Polish political life scene for a quite long period of time.
Fantastic. So there's just been a recent Polish election. Tell us about it.
Well, obviously the incumbent president, Andrzej Duda, who is a representative of the conservative Law and Justice Party. His victory was not decisive, rather a razor-thin or knife-edge victory. He got 51%, almost exactly 51%, precisely 51.03% of votes in the second round, whereas his opponent, Rafał Trzaskowski, representing the Civic Platform, the chief opposition party, got 48.97% of votes. In the first round, which took place in the end of June, Andrzej Duda obtained 43.5% of votes. Rafał Trzaskowski from the Civic Platform got 30.5% of votes. Szymon Hołownia, an independent candidate who worked for private TV station TVN belonging to the American corporation Scripps Network, got 14% of votes, and a nationalist candidate representing Confederate Party secured 7% of votes. Other voters received less, other candidates received less than 3% of votes. So that's the victory. The victory is undisputed, although not very, as I told, the gap between two candidates is not particularly large. What are the unique features of this last presidential election? First of all, the voter turnout was almost record high. Poland differs significantly from other European states because it is quite typical of Poland that voter turnout is very low. In the last 6 presidential elections, voter turnout in Poland on average was 58.58%, a number easy to memorize. This time it was 68%. So 10% above the average, and it almost broke the record from 1995, only 0.05% less voter turnout. The other unique and very untypical feature of this election was that, as a matter of fact, at the beginning, Rafał Trzaskowski was not the candidate of the Civic Platform, but a member of parliament, woman, Małgorzata Kidawa-Błońska. But she were so badly in rankings, in opinion polls, that she was replaced with Rafał Trzaskowski. And it was legally possible only because the first round presidential election was moved from the beginning of May to the end of June because of the COVID-19 pandemics. So I think that's the two most untypical features of these particular presidential elections.
It's very interesting. Just for many viewers, they won't be aware about the runoff system. So when you have the first election and the final two go into this second election, this runoff period, as we saw last week, how do the campaigns change between the sort of the large election we had before and then this final runoff? Are there significant differences that the candidates do in that final election period?
I would not say that the campaign was very different. However, Rafał Trzaskowski simply made an impression of better prepared. He could elicit enthusiasm from the masses. Małgorzata Kidawa-Błońska did not give rousing speeches, stimulating speeches. She was not exhilarating the masses, and she was not also a good rhetorician, I think so. And Rafał Trzaskowski turned out to be much better prepared, presented himself in a better way. And also I must say that maybe it is a little bit politically incorrect for many people, but it turns out that Polish society prefers to see men at the post of president. We had many women who were prime ministers, and they were very popular, for instance, Beata Szydło, but clearly Polish people would like to see men, not women, at the presidential post. It's not only Małgorzata Kidawa-Błońska who ran for presidency. We had also some other women in the past presidential election, like Hanna Gronkiewicz-Waltz, like Magdalena Ogórek, who at the beginning of the campaign were quite good opinion polls, had quite good results in the opinion polls, but month by month, week by week, her rankings declined.
So what are the key topics and issues of the two final contenders? How do they differentiate themselves?
Well, Duda teams clearly focused on ideological issues. They wanted, his camp wanted very skillfully and artfully to direct the main narratives, the main topics of the campaign towards matters of outlook, of ideology, especially LGBT and gender ideology. These were topics which were quite uncomfortable for Rafał Trzaskowski's team. Rafał Trzaskowski's team, in turn, concentrated more on economic matters and COVID-19, but primarily economic matters. And they, one of the strategic tactics used by Rafał Trzaskowski team was also to present the incumbent president Andrzej Duda as a man controlled by highly unpopular in Poland Jarosław Kaczyński, the leader of the ruling party Law and Justice, who has, let's say, in the opinion polls, a high negative electorate. Duda's team wanted to present, Trzaskowski's team wanted to present Duda as a not self-reliant, not an autonomous politician. but mainly they were focusing on economic matters. For instance, in public appearances, Rafał Trzaskowski drew public attention to the fact that local governments in recent 6 months experienced a very high drop in incomes, in budget incomes, even 40%, according to him. And he also underlined the fact that the unemployment level in Poland in recent 2 quarters is rising in a fast tempo.
So, yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, it's very difficult, the topics. One side you're talking about economy, facts and numbers. Others you're talking about the values of society. And we often see very difficult arguments among society groups here. One doing the economic rationale, together we'll be stronger and all this stuff. And then one looking at the who we are component of the population. Often the people doing the identity politics and who we are and the values we stand for usually beat the economic arguments. What's the current state of Poland? Was the process free and democratic? Were you happy with the election? Did all go smoothly?
Well, in my opinion, Poland is a democratic state. It is, of course, not a perfect democracy, but some voices that from time to time emerge in the West that compare current Polish political system to Putinist Russia, or that claim that Poland became an authoritarian state like Erdogan's Turkey, are groundless and unsubstantiated. The recent presidential election were not rigged, were not faked. Representatives of opposition, there is in every electoral commission, there is plenty of representatives of different, various miscellaneous opposition parties, persons of trust. Well, we do not have here so ubiquitous surveillance like in the People's Republic of China or in the United States of America. We do not have so many cameras on the streets like in the United Kingdom. Police is also not so brutal like in France during these last demonstrations of yellow vests in November last year. So no, Poland is a democratic country. However, having said that, I must say that democracy is not given once and for all anywhere. So every society should be, all the people should be vigilant and oppose potential dictatorial laws or misbehavior by politicians.
So how did Duda win? What did he do to motivate his voters to come out in such an increasing way?
That's a good question, and I think that every poll would give a different answer for your question. However, in my opinion, in my personal conviction, there are 3 things that vastly contributed to Duda's victory. And first of all, this Rafał Trzaskowski campaign was quite late. It de facto began in the midst of May. And he did really well. The trends were favorable for him. So I cannot exclude that if the campaign would last for 2 weeks later, the ultimate outcome of the election would be much different, and there would be another victor. So that's the first thing. Another, which is also very interesting, is the explicit, overt support given to Duda by the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump. It's also very unusual. There is an unprecedented situation in the bilateral relations, in the history of bilateral relations between the United States of America and Poland. But approximately 2 weeks before the first round, President Trump invited President Duda to Washington, which was broadly interpreted, both in the United States of America and in Poland and in other European states, as a gesture, as an act of very explicit support for President Duda. And one thing must be necessarily explained, because I guess that the predominant majority of the listeners are foreigners. In contrast to the rest of Europe, in Poland, President Trump is really popular. According to one of the opinion polls, one of the surveys conducted in the autumn last year, 50% of Poles supported Trump's foreign policy, whereas only 13% of Germans. It was the highest percentage in Europe. Also, furthermore, Americans as a nation are really liked in Poland. According to one of the surveys I came across lately, one of the newest, Americans are the 5th most liked nation in Poland. Only Czechs, Slovaks, the 4th. Only Czechs, Slovaks, and Italians are more liked than Americans. Also in contrast to Germany or France. So if you realize that first, Trump is liked very much in Poland, and Americans are liked in Poland too. So his backing, his support, overt and explicit, given to Duda, was one of the reasons of Duda's victory. I think so. And also some policies carried out, pursued by the current government, especially in the social sphere, is really popular in Poland. The Law and Justice 4 years ago implemented a very generous social program called 500+. This program basically boils down to giving 500 zlotys, which is approximately 110, 111 euro or $126 for every child in a family a month. So if a family has one child, it receives 500 zlotys a month. Zloty is a Polish currency. If the family has 2 children, it receives 1,000 zlotys a month, and so on and so forth. And this is a quite popular program in Poland. So this is also one of the factors that unquestionably contributed to Duda's victory. So I think that these 3 reasons are the crucial, according to my opinion, of course.
Fantastic and very interesting. Just for those viewers, Polish birth rates are about 1.39, which is lower or about the same as Italy, and much lower than Sweden at 1.85. So there certainly has been talk among the Poles for some time about increasing its birth rate, and policies like this were certainly designed initially as a support for the welfare of the children, but have often become much more than that as an institutional encouragement of the family lifestyle.
If I may add something, the declared objectives of this 500+ program were 2. First of all, it was designed to induce, to boost, to increase the birth rate in Poland. But the second objective was to diminish, to decline poverty among children in Poland. And as regards the first objective, we may now conclude that it largely failed because the increase in birth rate is not serious. There's minor one since this policy was introduced. But as regards the latter objective, decline in the poverty among children, this program succeeded. According to World Bank data, the poverty among children in Poland drastically dropped by over 90%. So this, not all objectives were realized, but some of them were. And this is, of course, popular because many people get money. So that's
handing out free
obvious.
money has often been popular.
Yes. However, it's also interesting because in the autumn of the last year, the Prime Minister of Poland, Mateusz Morawiecki, declared that the next year will be the budget deficit will be for the first time in 30 years at zero level. Now we know that it will not be. Instead of record low budget deficit, we'll have one of the highest budget deficits in history due to this ill-fated coronavirus pandemics and the ensuing recession. So,
well, let's talk about COVID for a moment. How did that actually impact the election, both in the mechanics of people voting and getting out there and in the campaign? Yeah.
Undoubtedly, the COVID-19 really seriously impacted the election. First of all, if not these pandemics, the replacement of candidates would not be possible. So that's above all. But also bear in mind that the Law and Justice Party is especially popular among the old people, pensioners, senior citizens. And as we all know very well, this COVID-19 is especially dangerous, menacing, and deadly for the older people, not the young. So it was the voter turnout among the old people was lower than the among of younger people. So this was a factor very unfavorable for Duda. And also the economic situation in the last 6 months in Poland deteriorated, worsened. So COVID-19 epidemics definitely were unbeneficial to the incumbent president and were factor beneficial to and advantages for Trzaskowski's team. And I think that that's also a lesson for future elections in other countries. COVID-19 really matters in elections. It's not something minor, unimportant, irrelevant.
And then did the actual process of voting and meeting voters and rallies and things like that, how was that altered?
At some point in April and in the late March, the restrictions in gatherings were quite serious in Poland. So almost campaigns were cancelled, and except for TV, except for let's say appearances in TV or in interviews in press. But later in July, in the late June, when the number of cases of COVID-19 in Poland declined, maybe not very much, but declined, the campaign returned to normalcy, let's say. So at some point, it simply slowed down the campaign, or maybe not stopped entirely, but slowed down the campaign.
Fantastic. So looking at the results, I know there are some maps out there to show a significant east-west split. There's other maps that show a split in rural communities and city communities. There's a variety of different ways of showing this result. Do you think there is a east-west split of the voting population? What do you think are the groupings that occur of the different voters?
Yes, it is partly true. I think not only in these elections, but there is a fault line between Western and Northern Poland, which is more pro-liberal, which tends to vote more often for the civic platform. And on the second hand, Eastern Poland and Southeastern Poland has a clear inclination to vote more often for conservative politicians, the law and justice. It is an outcome, it is a heritage of the Polish history, because these territories which have a tendency to vote for liberal parties belonged in the 19th century to Prussia, later Germany, whereas this territory of Poland, which in the past, in the 19th century, belonged to the Russian Empire and to Austria, or later Austria-Hungary, have a tendency to vote for law and justice. In this year's presidential election, Trzaskowski won in 10 western and northern voivodeships, whereas Duda won only in 6 voivodeships. One may ask why Duda won the election, because the answer is the devil is in the detail. In the western voivodeships, voivodeship is, let's say, Polish equivalent of Spanish provinces or German lands. In the western voivodeships, Trzaskowski won, but not decisively. Whereas in the eastern and southeastern voivodeships, Duda had a very clear, explicit, distinct advantage, edge over his opponent. I will give you one example. The 2 most populated voivodeships in Poland are Mazovian voivodeships, basically the territory around Warsaw, and the Silesian voivodeships, basically an area around Katowice in South Poland. And in these 2 voivodeships, Trzaskowski together secured 200,000 more votes than Duda. But in only one Eastern Poland voivodeship, Lublin voivodeship, Duda received 357,000 votes more than his opponent.
Wow.
So that's why he won decisively in this part of Poland, and he lost marginally in the western part of Poland. Of course, we also have, let's say, our equivalent of swing states, these voivodeships between, let's say, in central Poland. But what is even more important is that Duda clearly and decisively won in the rural areas, in the small cities. If we concentrate, if we look not at voivodeships, but at communes, administrative units of lower level, we will see that Duda won decisively there. And it needs to be stressed necessarily that in order to comprehend and understand this situation, Poland is less urbanized than Western Europe. 60% of Poles live in cities, whereas 40% in the countryside, live in the countryside. Moreover, 32% of Poles live in small towns and cities, that is cities which have less than 100,000 inhabitants. So if you want to win election in Poland, it's not enough to win to win in big agglomerations. You must woo for votes of small cities and the rarer areas. You must canvass support of the countryside.
It's many parties have a split between a political party that is more comfortable in cities and a political party that is more comfortable not in cities. And there are many different ways of dividing populations, their friendliness and ability to cope with the groupings of the city versus the more rural life is a very, very complicated one to map out, but one many election campaigns use as a fault line to campaign on. In terms of the actual campaigns, what did the campaign team do well?
What the campaign teams did well. Duda very skillfully, very cunningly, very artfully directed the main narrative towards this identity, ideology matters. They also were skillful at pouncing on some mistakes made by Trzaskowski. I will give you one example. Between the first and second round of elections, there were two spectacular bus crashes in Warsaw. Let me remind you that Rafał Trzaskowski is a mayor of Warsaw. So one of these crashes was very spectacular because the bus fell from the elevated highway and the bus full of passengers. It turned out that the drivers of the buses were under the influence of drugs, of methamphetamine. And Duda's team pointed to it. They skillfully, they messaged, induced the message, disseminated or spread the message that if Trzaskowski is unable to assure security and safety of Warsaw citizens, all the more he would be unable to assure, to guarantee security and safety of the entire Poland. Duda's message was that he's a bad manager, especially in emergencies. Of course, this was purely accident. Something like that could happen anywhere, everywhere. But in these two, in this short period of time, it happened in Warsaw. So Duda's team took advantage of it very skillfully. What Trzaskowski's team did well, I think that they could, Trzaskowski could pounce on Duda in economic affairs, economic matters. That was a good choice. He also presented quite well in the media. As regards Duda, I think that the strong point of Duda's campaign was also his family. They presented, his wife and his daughter presented very well in the media. His daughter is quite eloquent, very photogenic, and definitely his family was not a liability for him, but an asset. So that's what Duda's team did quite well.
Fantastic. And what did the campaigns do less well or badly?
Well, I do not think that Trzaskowski's team did some very serious mistakes. What they did really badly was the bad choice of candidates at the beginning. Nowadays, political consultants and within this Trzaskowski's team claim that they made one mistake. Between the first and second round, Trzaskowski did not visit any city in Eastern Poland, small city in Eastern Poland. And
wow.
Yes, and they now claim that it was a mistake. At the beginning, they thought that maybe he will be visiting small cities in Western and Northern Poland. But now it turns out that it was a mistake. As regards Duda, I also do not think some serious errors, mistakes, blunders on the part of them. The campaign was quite good on the part of them. I am not able to pounce on them what wrong they did. Ultimately they won. So
fantastic. So what does this mean for Poland going forward? I mean, there are people with very scary stories about an authoritarian regime, as you talked about earlier. What does this mean for you, and what does this mean for the government?
I do not think that, for instance, foreign policy will change revolutionary right now. The next elections are going to take place in 2023. It will be free elections to the European Parliament, parliamentary election, and to local governments. Undoubtedly, Rafał Trzaskowski emerged as one of future leaders of the civic platform, and he is quite popular. Also, we can see some internal splits within the Law and Justice Party. There is a group of very ambitious politicians who oppose the incumbent Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki. I mean, among these politicians are former Prime Minister Beata Szydło, Minister of Justice Zbigniew Ziobro, the CEO of the public TV, Jacek Kurski, and they clearly intend to undermine the position of the Mateusz Morawiecki within the party. And there are some gossips or rumors. I am not able to verify these gossips or rumors any way. I'm also not able to falsify them. But there are some rumors that the opposition is preparing for serious protests, demonstrations, strikes, maybe even in the autumn. Definitely, the worsening and deteriorating economic situation in Poland is a factor favorable for the opposition. So I think that in the long term, the opposition is going to come to power. In the medium term, maybe not in the short term. Yes, that's what I wanted to say.
Fantastic. So looking at this election as a whole and about this process, what are the things that people should learn from it? Looking at it, if you say there is one lesson that an election professional should take away, what do you think that is?
One, I would say two lessons. First of all, that the support of some leader, politician from other country may really matter, like in this case. Of course, no political consultant will be able to force or compel the president of global superpower to support his candidate. So, you know, that's that's something that can happen irrespective of somebody's will or not. And also that COVID-19 matters. It is a factor, black swan, and let's say silver bullet, or this as a factor that could really game changer. That's a good word. It could really influence future elections, not only in Poland. So in many different, many various miscellaneous ways and manners. That's my opinion on that matter.
Fantastic. That's really helpful. So is there any final extra things that we should tell our listeners about the elections?
Well, I think that this economic situation, you know, if economic situation could impact election in Poland, and according to the European Commission forecast, this year GDP in Poland is going to plummet by 4.6%. So what can we tell about France, Italy, or Spain? According to European Commission, GDPs of these aforementioned states are going to fall by 11% this year. So I think that this will be very interesting year for Western Europe as well, and not necessarily safe. You know, a lot of riots are on the horizon right now.
Well, thank you. That is clearly most concerning, but very insightful and incredibly useful. I really appreciate the time you have spent telling our listeners today about the most recent Polish elections, and particularly your excellent English to go through it with us. So thank you so much for that. And that's been really kind.
Okay. See you. Thank you for listening to me.